newsletter. There we go. We have a monthly newsletter that the Andalusia Institute puts out. So I put a link to that in the chat. That link's got a lot of our events and what we've been kind of up to. Since we have two two different federal grants on like two very different projects. We've been really active that way. Our Writing for Success grant has been working with schools on curriculum around Flannery O'Connor, specifically targeting fifth grade, trying to meet literacy goals there. But we've actually kind of branched it out a little bit, and we've been doing a lot of workshops in the community for that grant. And so it's been really successful. We actually have the mentors that are kind of running that program have done a podcast. So that you can check that out, and that's been exciting as well. So a lot going on with that grant. Then we also have an oral history grant, and we're kind of that's capturing stories around Flannery O'Connor, and we're kind of gearing that up. We're actually hiring a project manager right now. It's a part-time position, but it's funded through that grant. And then we're doing some workshops around oral history right now too. So just kind of laying the foundation for that one, but we're excited, and we'll be able to put that out as well, like once we have those stories archived. So anyway, those are some of the things we've been doing, and then we've been working with the O'Connor Trust on just trying to collaborate on some of our events and whatnot. Okay, so speaking of grants, we did host this summer the NEH, the National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Institutes. We had a lot of lectures. We had 24 O'Connor scholars here living on campus studying O'Connor, Camp Flannery, as we call it. And so one of our graduates, our alums from the Summer Institute, he now has a new album out. He's a musician, Colin Cutler, and so Colin's album is called Tar Water, and those are songs inspired by Flannery O'Connor. And so I just put that in the chat. Teresa just came in, so I'll put that link again. But yeah, so the full album, or the album releases November 3rd, but we are going to try to do maybe an album release or some sort of launch party or something digitally via Zoom. So you all will get an invitation to that. Look for that. But that's one of the things we're planning on, and then we're also working on a few more kind of programs with some of those scholars so they can share out some of the work they've been doing. And then my final announcement is so for anyone who's nearby in Georgia or South Carolina, there's a town, Rome, Georgia. They sponsor the Rome International Film Festival, and so you may or may not know there's a new biopic of Flannery O'Connor coming out called Wildcat. It's directed by Ethan Hawke and starring Maya Hawke. So they're going to be at the Rome Film Festival, and it's going to show there. But in addition to that, they're going to show the American Master Series, the PBS documentary Flannery. So I'll be on a panel for that. They asked me to come up and be on a panel and represent Andalusia Institute and Georgia College. So if anybody is nearby, that'll be November 3rd in Rome, Georgia. So I just put the link there for the Rome International Film Festival. I'll let you all know I coordinated with them. So we did send some things for Ethan and Maya Hawke from Andalusia, including peacock feathers. And let's see what else, some books, I think. So and stickers. They asked for the peacock feather, and then they're like, what else can you send us? And so then we sent a bunch of stuff. So I don't, we'll see what happens, but I think that's kind of exciting. And oh, nice.
There you go. That's what they need, murdered mayhem.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, we should have sent.
Welcome to Georgia. Yeah.
So anyway, that's going on. So those are my announcements. Bruce, do you have any other announcements?
Well, yeah, the thing I want to talk about is that the Flannery O'Connor review
Yes.
finally came out, and should be in the hands of people who want it. Talk to me if you want it, and don't have it. And on the last page is the announcement about the O'Connor conference we're going to host in September 2024. And because NEH is throwing money at us, bless them, for this conference, we're not charging a registration fee. It'll be a rather inexpensive conference to attend. You still have to do the airfare and the lodging and the food, but hey, we're not gonna charge you the usual $1,000 to come to an O'Connor conference in Milledgeville. So the 12th through the 15th of September. And it is one of many celebrations of the O'Connor centennial. Flannery was born 100 years before March 25th of 2025. So there are going to be a lot of conferences next academic year, and we'll probably have more events than just this.
We will. Yes, we've been working on a calendar.
Be great. Okay, so that's my announcement. Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's get started. And I want to say, anything anybody wants to bring up about these letters, and something you want to say, something that strikes you, and maybe you want to hear other people comment on it. Hey, fire away, use the chat or raise your hand, and
I'll catch you.
Try to notice. Yes, that's Jordan's job to pay attention. Let's see. One thing I know to say about these letters is that they seem a little different from the last batch of letters. Last month, when we were talking about the earlier preserved letters, for one reason or another, it's very much about business. How is Flannery O'Connor going to make this writing biz pay off for her? How is she going to get the right kind of contract? And who does she need to be in touch with? Well, tonight is 1953, 1955, somehow or other, after she published Wise Blood and was starting to work on A Good Man Is Hard to Find and Other Stories, she seems to have relaxed about that a little bit, to be fairly confident that it was going to be okay. Not that she doesn't talk about it at all, but she talks about it less. And what she talks about more is religion. And, there's a bit of a mystery, how could she keep that out of her earlier letters? Why does it pop up now? Because it is so central to who she is as a writer. I think most of you were in on our discussion last month, but not all of you. So I should repeat that The Habit of Being is the creation of Sally Fitzgerald. And, her fingerprints are all over it. And bless her, what a job to take on, all those negotiations with correspondence and all those negotiations with Regina Klein O'Connor to get her permission to allow things to be included in the collection. It could have failed spectacularly, this project, but Sally Fitzgerald made it happen. Nevertheless,
Bruce, Teresa has her hand up.
Well, how about
I have a question
Okay.
for you.
Yeah.
In reading and in listening to a podcast, and I don't know where it was, but I was listening or reading that Carolyn,
Gordon?
Carolyn Gordon had a big editorial impact with Flannery, and she's always referring to Carolyn, in kind of a backhand way. Carolyn criticized this, but in reality, she's benefiting. Sally Fitzgerald manipulate the relationship between Flannery and Carolyn, and how much did Flannery really enjoy Carolyn?
This is Sally Fitzgerald's book. I have no reason to believe that Sally Fitzgerald had any difficulty with Caroline Gordon. Caroline Gordon was part of the networks of established people who were greatly beneficial to O'Connor. And the person who's the expert on your question is Christine Flanagan, who published a book a couple of years ago with all the correspondence she could get her hands on between Flannery O'Connor and Caroline Gordon. And Christine thinks that it was a very good relationship. And Christine occasionally makes comments about those people out there who think it was not such a great relationship. And I feel as if she's pointing at me a little bit. She could be she could be thinking number one opponent on that question is Catherine Hempel Brown, who wrote a book about that is largely about the relationship between Flannery O'Connor and Caroline Gordon, and somewhere along the way, Catherine Hempel Brown calls it a dysfunctional relationship. And I might be overstating it a little bit. They got a lot out of, Flannery got a lot out of it, in her reactions to what Caroline Gordon was saying. I tend to think that there was some tension and a little difficulty between mentor and mentee, and that Flannery, being the genius, was able to give the teacher what she wants and still do her own thing. And so, you can track the whole story about all the advice Caroline Gordon gave to Flannery O'Connor, and then figure out what Flannery O'Connor did about it. And for Christine, this is a totally successful relationship. That this was all very positive. And I should add, in the Flannery O'Connor Review, we have an article about how Christine Flanagan uses the correspondence between the two of them to teach creative writing students how to give each other advice. Here are comments that are not worth making. I like the dialogue. No, look at what Caroline Gordon does, challenging Flannery in detail about basic things and asking her lots of questions. And even when, I can agree with, even when Flannery doesn't do exactly what Caroline Gordon was telling her to do, she still seems to benefit, by think about this and, take this more seriously. And Flannery might not write what Caroline Gordon would have predicted, but she usually came up with something good as she thought about her story more. And I guess I can lead to a grand generalization that Flannery O'Connor's best correspondents were the ones who gave her a little trouble, who asked her questions that maybe put her on the spot, and questioned her consistency or questioned her beliefs. And I don't have many friends who will do that to me. Say, here's what's wrong with you. But Caroline Gordon would do that. she would say, you know, you don't know how to do point of view, for example, which I think is wrong. But you know, I can give Caroline Gordon some credit for making Flannery kind of feel a little defensive. So Flannery might have gotten even better at figuring out how to narrate a given story. I mean, I think Katharine Hepburn Brown, you know, one of the more negative things she says in her book is that Caroline Gordon didn't really think that any woman could be a good writer, really. And so she wasn't really sure that messing with this Flannery O'Connor was worth it. And Flannery O'Connor wasn't really sure that a woman could be of any help to her. You know, that they were both kind of not particularly feminist women who were, you know, in a way kind of dependent on each other for success and maybe a little prestige in there. And so it was tangled by the fact that this was not an era when women were bonding over their writing and being totally, purely, mutually supportive. You know, things were complicated in bad ways in those days, and there's, you know, really no way it could work out perfectly for them. Yeah, I guess that's my.
Well, and then Heidi adds to that, you know, O'Connor, Ben Griffith was also an early mentor and had some helpful insights in his letter on June 8th, 1955.
Well, yeah, O'Connor had a lot of mentors, and there are a lot of correspondence in here. And I was
he's actually mentoring Ben, though. She's criticizing Ben's story. Yeah. So there you have a gender reversal on top of that. Right. That's what I thought was interesting. I mean, she just flat out says,
yeah, good question. Yeah, she did. She, what's the name of the guy who wrote the book, Flannery O'Connor and Me, the friendship between Flannery O'Connor and me?
Oh, yeah.
Story, and he got published in the Georgia Review. So, you know, she gave good advice. She could tell somebody how to improve a story. Yes, she did mentor some men. Did Flannery O'Connor mentor any women writers? Well, sure. She mentored, I mean, in a way, she was mentoring Marriott Lee. And maybe she was, in a sense, mentoring Betty Hester, you know, who needed help, maybe not with writing, but, you know, needed counseling and needed a friend. And Flannery would try very hard to give what she thought a friend needed. You know, I think she could be a really good friend. Okay, yes. Now here, James McLeod. Thank you, Catherine. Before we really got to the letters, to say something about Sally Fitzgerald. You know, she's wonderful. Thank you, Sally Fitzgerald. But, you know, she does have her opinions, and Sally Fitzgerald's opinions can be questioned like anybody's opinions, even though they're in the book of the letters that we all take so very seriously. And one of the things that Sally Fitzgerald says early on for this section is Flannery O'Connor loved Andalusia. Well, that's plausible, you know, worked for her. On the other hand, I'm reading chapters right now of the biography of Regina and Flannery being written by Carol Schloss. And I promise you, when this book comes out and you read, you know, Carol's version of what went on at the farm between mama and daughter, we will have reason to question whether Flannery was so delighted to be living at Andalusia. She had no options. She had no choices. But I've been shocked by several things I've read already about the situation there, and you know, Carol's being very careful, and she's not yet spelling out all of her conclusions. She's just laying out all this data, but it's it's really interesting, and it makes me say, oh my gosh, why didn't I ever think to ask these questions? It's really going to be quite good.
So Catherine, one of her sources, she's going through a lot of the old farm records she was able to get a hold of. So like, you know, her and I, we talked about some of the economics,
Wow.
you know, that you see in like the in O'Connor, and like Carol can tell you how much they paid for a cow. Like she can tell you, like she's been going through a lot.
And the county courthouse.
Yeah.
I went to the county courthouse on Carol Schloss's behalf, trying to get some stuff for her, and I was treated politely, but I got nothing. And then Carol went back to the same courthouse, and I don't know, maybe she said Stanford every once in a while, and she got everything she wanted out of the local authorities that they managed to not give me on her behalf. That was on her behalf. That was another interesting lesson about how I can be put in my place and dismissed very easily by the local authorities. And she has research skills that I don't have. So yeah, there's something else to look forward to. And I would say, yes, those are her sources, farm records that are now available to scholars, and court records in the state of Georgia, which have been sitting there all these years and nobody went through, knew what to look for to find these stuff. And you know, what Carol is turning up is really interesting. And I don't think I would say Flannery hated being at Andalusia, but it was complicated and problematic, and it's a miracle that things turned out as well as they did for O'Connor's career. Okay, where are we going next? Yeah, we don't know when this is going to be published. I'm not even sure Carol wants me talking about it. One thing you can do when you go through these letters, and maybe all of us English teachers just do this automatically, is just look for statements that are made along the way that are about the fiction. And you know, there are a fair number of these things. There's that line about the artificial N-word in which Flannery O'Connor explains that she thought that the symbol, the big symbol of the story, indicated the Negroes suffering for us all. Does that symbol really mean that? And if it does, is that a racist thing to do? Flannery's gotten into some trouble for her explanation of her own story that might not even be a totally accurate description of what's going on in the story. And I'm perverse enough to be more interested in how Flannery's comments don't quite fit what she's talking about. I mean, when she says things and I agree with them, I just kind of glide over them, and my attention attaches to the lines where I say, "Hey, wait a minute, that might not be right." She has a passage about the comforts of home, and in which you would think that she is totally on the side of Thomas, the protagonist of the story. And most people who talk about that story nowadays do not think of Thomas as the hero of this story. It's sometimes I think maybe she changed her mind about the story, or forgot what she wrote, or something. And to me, it's kind of an illustration of how after somebody finishes a story, they just become one more literary critic talking about their text. And then there's the business about, there are several things here about point of view in these letters that I find myself saying, no, that's not quite right. And I want to spend this as in the most complimentary fashion I can. Carolyn Gordon told Flannery O'Connor she didn't know how to do point of view. And somewhere, maybe in a later letter, Flannery says the famous line, point of view runs me nuts. I don't think we've gotten to that line yet. Well, no, it doesn't. Flannery O'Connor is a master. Carolyn Gordon should be learning from her, not the other way around, in my humble opinion. Caroline Gordon told Flannery O'Connor that if you're using an omniscient narrator, you know, and she's kind of third person omniscient or something close to it, you should always sound like Samuel Johnson. Well, Flannery O'Connor cannot sound like Samuel Johnson. It might not have done her any good to agree with Caroline Gordon that that was something to aspire to. No, Flannery, don't listen to the teacher, says I. One of the things that Flannery O'Connor is really good at is called free indirect style, where as the omniscient narrator is going along telling you what's happening and who said what, they can shift into the word choices and the angle of vision of a character for a while. And it's sneaky because it doesn't come right out and say, and now we're going to tell you what the character thinks, but you just start to pick up on it. And you might be tricked into adopting that character's attitudes. And then it gets very complicated. I would say it's masterful. I would say this is way beyond trying to be the always formal, authoritative Samuel Johnson. Things get much more complicated when you start letting little hints about how characters are thinking and feeling sneak in to the prose. And Flannery does this all over the place, from early in her career to the end. When I was in graduate school, I was assigned to read a dissertation about free indirect style in Jane Austen. And I put Jane Austen up against Flannery O'Connor, and I say, Flannery's doing the same tricks all the time. It's just as good. But Flannery bought into the idea that there was something wrong with her inclinations about how to talk about what her characters were thinking. And you know, it didn't hold direct none, but as far as I can see, but it's something she was puzzled over and troubled by. And I think Caroline could have done better by her a little bit on that particular score. Yes, Teresa, you have your hand up.
Bruce, did she ever reach a point in her career where when she received advice from somebody who was her mentor, and I put that in quotes, where she started to disagree more and more and assert her independence and stand up more on her own 2 feet?
I think she was doing that from childhood. She was standing up to authority, always in the most polite way possible. And I think she was always dismissing advice and doing her own thing. I think she got better and better and better, maybe at making people think she was taking their advice, even if she wasn't. But
Teresa, people point to the famous in one of her children's books she wrote, you know, in the book, you know, that it wasn't a very good book. And you know, they kind of say, like, you know, from the beginning she had this kind of literary critic you know,
somebody must have given her the book and said, this is a good book for you.
Yeah.
She gets out her pen and writes in the book, you know, this is the worst book ever. I mean, that's standing up to somebody who's likely to see that book sometime and say, oh, Flannery didn't like that that novel that I thought would be good for her or her character. Okay, what else? What else about that? Oh, I want to go to page 92. To try to illustrate how complicated things are for Flannery about how to write. I think this is connected to what we were talking about a minute ago. I just love this. Sometimes Flannery is totally sure of herself and authoritative, and she knows exactly what she's up to and what it's all about. And sometimes she'll say, I don't know what's going on here. And here it is in one letter. It's one of the letters to A, who is Betty Hester. Thank God for Betty Hester asking Flannery all these difficult questions, and and bless Flannery for trying to answer her intelligently. Okay, so one paragraph she says, this is like religion class. Almost. It's also about writing. One of the awful things about writing when you are a Christian is that for you, the ultimate reality is the incarnation. The present reality is the incarnation, and nobody believes in the incarnation. That is, nobody in your audience. My audience are the people who think God is dead. At least these are the people I am conscious of writing for. Okay, that's not little Miss Self-Doubt talking there. I mean, there is some. I guess there's a little uncertainty that it's complicated for her sense of audience. But to me, there's a big contrast between that tone and what we get 3 paragraphs later on the same page. You are right that I won't ever be able entirely to understand my own work or even my own motivations. Okay, so what does that tell us? First of all, it tells us that Betty Hester wrote her friend a letter and said, you don't know what you're writing and you don't know why you wrote it. Well, gee, friend, thanks. But Flannery has it in her to say, well, I guess that's right. Wow. She can be absolutely sure that it's all about religion and the struggle to get that across to people who don't accept it. And then she can admit just a few lines later that she's not sure what's going on here, which doesn't call into question whether the religion is in there somewhere. What it calls into question is that, there might not be a lot of other stuff thrown in there too, that might not seem totally religious to us. Jordan, you brought up Ben Griffin. I want to bring up the line on the bottom of 118 and 119, where she's talking about what Ben Griffin said to her about her own writing. This just kills me. He remarked that in these stories by Flannery O'Connor, there was usually a strong kind of sex potential that was always turned aside, and that this gave the stories some of their tension, as for instance, in A Circle in the Fire, where there's a strong possibility that the child in the woods with the boys may be attacked, but the attack takes another form. This is what gets me, is the next line. I really hadn't thought about it until he pointed it out, but I believe it is a very perceptive comment. What? You're saying you put a sexual threat in all of your stories and you didn't know it? And, the guy from Macon writes you a letter and says, oh, have you noticed you're constantly threatening to have a sexual crime happen? And it's everywhere? And Flannery says, oh, I really hadn't noticed that, but I guess you're right. Wow. Talk about not knowing your own motivations and your what you end up putting in the stories. Okay.
I wanted to mention too, Sue wrote, that she finds it funny that O'Connor identified her audience as those who believe God is dead rather than those who don't believe in his existence.
Well, okay. Yes, there is a distinction to be made there, I suppose. Um, she doesn't say, I mean, there are other places where you can find Flannery talking about, gee, it would be nice if I had an audience that was all Catholic and they knew all the shortcuts and the shorthand and what things mean and the tradition. It'd be so much easier to write if I were writing for those people. But I'm not. A lot of Catholics take Flannery O'Connor very seriously, and they feel as if she's writing for them, right? But Flannery doesn't always say that. She's, let's just say, inconsistent. She looks at it in different ways from time to time. Yeah. I guess that's the end of that thought. Okay.
But there does seem to be that direct reference to Nietzsche too, that God is dead. And I know Hank Edmondson has that book on kind of her response to Nietzsche as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Nietzsche is, on her mind. She put him in. She put Heidegger in Good Country People, not Nietzsche, but I think she knew something about Nietzsche. I don't think she's just saying it's atheism. I think it's more she knows it's more complicated than that. Okay, I'm still looking at my notes about what Flannery says about writing. Okay, here's another line I want to call into question, quibble with maybe a little bit. Page 106, talking to guess who? Betty Hester again. She's talking about the writing of Good Country People. And she says, you have to be able to dominate the existence that you characterize. I would say, no, she doesn't. Flannery O'Connor is not totally in control of what she's creating when she creates Holga Joy Hopewell. She's claiming it here, but I don't believe that's true. I think there's so much going on with Holga, and it's so personal that, and there's all this stuff thrown in there about the relationship between Flannery and her mother, and Flannery doesn't dominate Regina. That I think this is a line of wishful thinking. Where might this come from? Well, maybe it comes from Caroline Gordon saying, you need to be Samuel Johnson, totally in control. Maybe if Flannery had another mentor, she might have relaxed a little bit and said, it's okay if I'm not totally in control of everything all the time and absolutely the final authority on everything I write about. And the stories still turned out to be the great stories that they are, however she got there. But, if you're interested in what was going on in her head as she was coming up with these stories, there's plenty of evidence that it's not simple and clear and easily explainable. It's very complicated how she had all these conflicting emotions about all sorts of everything. Okay. Let's talk about religion a little bit, because we haven't much yet.
You definitely see, that formation of a religious vision here. I mean, we talked about in the earlier group, there's a clear through line from the prayer journal to these letters here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. There is no question that Catholicism deeply understood and totally embraced was very important to the creation of these stories and the novels. I don't think anybody, seriously questions that. But still, there are things that she says that are complicating and maybe wrong about religion in her fiction. You know. What did I write down? Well, page 99, there's a long passage there about the relationship between religion and emotion. And Flannery O'Connor says, religion is separate from emotion. Emotion is probably irrelevant or bad for good religion. The person who wrote Parker's Back is going to tell me that emotion and romance is irrelevant to religion? Well, she hadn't written Parker's Back when she said this, but I think that's not a skeleton key to Flannery O'Connor. When I read a Flannery O'Connor story, I am forced to feel all sorts of emotions. And, you know, if she's trying to give me a religious lesson, surely she thinks that the emotions she's making me feel are part of the strategy here. So I basically want to say, get out of here with your statement that emotion doesn't have anything to do with religion. Maybe when you're at Sacred Heart and you're in the middle of a church service, maybe you can separate them, but then you go home and you're asking yourself, how do I write a good short story that just happens to be deeply about religion? And when she's in that situation, I think it's all about emotion. It's all about emotions that people aren't even aware of they're having. You know, it's not a brain thing. You know, Parker's just about the stupidest character she ever created. And I think, well, there's a religious thing going on at the end of that story, and it has to do with his love for his wife, almost to the exclusion of everything else. It's why it's a great story. Maybe it's a complete change of attitude on Flannery's part. But you know, it's complicated. Flannery always agreed that romance was something she needed in her fiction. It would be good if it were in her fiction, and she didn't feel like she ever got it right. She would always question herself about, you know, am I able to do this at all? And she tells Betty Hester, oh, I really, really care about romance, about romantic love. It's so sacred to me that I don't write about it. Well, you're going to write about the sacred all the time, and it's never going to come up. What? I mean, there's something to question there. And there are some people who are kind of down on Flannery O'Connor precisely because there isn't enough love. And how do we answer that? We either say, oh, no, we don't need any love. We don't need any emotion in our lives. Or we say, oh, there is love. It's just of a form that Flannery didn't quite realize she was putting in there, which is kind of my answer. I mean, it's complicated. I mean, you know, how can that be that you can be writing about love and not realize it or not recognize it as love? I get to Parker's Back, and I'm pretty sure I see love there. When I go through the manuscripts of the Partridge Festival, I see Flannery trying to make that story into a love story. And then she gives up and pulls back and tries to erase most of the traces that those two main characters were going to fall in love at the end of the story. I think she agreed it was something she needed, and she worked at it. And I can't really reconcile that manuscript record with a statement that, oh, well, emotion really doesn't have much of anything to do with religion. I can agree that Flannery looks at other writers and they think that they're sappy. You know, she thinks that they're sappy, that they're sentimental, that they're no good. And it's and she sees a misuse of emotion. And she doesn't want to do that. You know, she's got a really healthy BS detector. And if people are saying love conquers all and it makes everything okay at the end of any work, she's not going to go for that. That's too easy for her to accept. But it's got to be in there somewhere. Yes, I see love in the DP with ha. I see love in a lot of O'Connor, but I always feel like, am I the only person who thinks this is a moment of love? So, you know, stay on the lookout because it's an important issue. I know people who've given up on reading Flannery O'Connor because they say she's too mean and loveless. Well, how are we going to answer that? She is sometimes really, you know, mean, that's for sure, but loveless? Okay.
Teresa has her hand up.
Yeah, Teresa.
Do you see her love as kind of backhanded? Kind of, I don't know if that's the right word, but it may come off as sarcastic, but it's not. And again, I'm using sarcasm as a word for what a word I don't know. Is it indirect love? I mean, she never says, you know, love or emotion, but you can see that she loves her mother. I mean, but her mother also drives her nuts.
Huh. Well, yeah, she loves her mother and her mother drives her nuts. How that got into the fiction? You know, does Helga Joy Hopewell love Mrs. Hopewell? Does Mrs. Hopewell love Helga Joy Hopewell? Go write a dissertation on that one. I mean, people have. I mean, I've seen half a dissertation on that question. You know, everything starts at home, right? I think Flannery loved her father and she lost him. And then she tried to have a kind of replacement relationship with her mother. She needed to love her mother. She wanted to love her mother. But, you know, you can't just will it and make it happen. You know, if it's not happening, you know, sometimes it's just not going to happen. And you know, it was always a rather difficult relationship. And Flannery was a good daughter who killed her mother off in story after story after story. I still believe that paradox, you know, that and so that how loving is that? Well, she paid close attention to Mama. She listened. I think she listened to everything her mother said and used it. That's a kind of love. But I think my relationship with my mother was much better than Flannery O'Connor's relationship with her mother, and thank goodness. And you know, we had some difficulties, but not like this. And so I can't look at this and just say, "Oh, isn't this lovely?" That you know, Regina did what she did and gave Flannery this life. I mean, that's all true, but I think they were just at each other with every other sentence, and being polite about it, which can make it worse, which can make the tension, you know, more painful. You know, when you're just putting Band-Aids all the time, you can get real tired of that. Okay. I was just at some point I was just about to bring up. Let me read this. What Sue just said. I wonder how many examples of romantic love she ever had. Maybe the Fitzgerald. Maybe she was like the misfit. If she had been there, she would have known. That's good. If I'd actually seen a love relationship. Yeah, I don't know what to think about the Fitzgeralds. Okay, I have no business having a comment about the Fitzgeralds. Marriage, that's a good point. Who was in love in this family? Oh, yeah. All right, somebody go write the book where, you know, here's the model that Flannery O'Connor grew up with for a wonderful relationship that was totally loving. So she could say, oh yeah, I want that. Good luck. Yeah, I don't know where to point. That sounds like a terrible thing to say about a bunch of people who are still living. So let's wonder about that. All right, next comment about religion. We end these pages, and this like punchline to the whole assignment, as far as I could see, with the famous thing about Mary McCarthy at the party, who said, apparently just trying to be nice, well, I think the Eucharist is a nice symbol. And Flannery, who hadn't said much of anything all evening long, gets irritated with that and says, well, if it's just a symbol, to hell with it. And that's one of the lines in The Habit of Being that gets quoted most often as an indication that Flannery takes her Catholicism as seriously as possible. So seriously that creative writing might just be a distraction from reality. You know, might just be a way we kid ourselves about what's really important. You can go read The Enduring Chill. That's a good example. And you could say, oh, you know, you ask Flannery how she feels about art, and she can be rather sarcastic about it, even though she's devoting her whole life to creating art.
Bruce, Heidi has
Getting insight into that, I just know I have to bring it up tonight. Yes,
Heidi has her hand up.
Oh, hi.
I don't want to interrupt. This is a completely different tangent. So if you wanted
okay.
to finish on that thought.
Finished. I have nothing to say about that line anyway. I just wanted to bring it up. Okay.
I just had a kind of a fun story. So many of you may have met William Sessions. So Silly Billy, of course, and he was working on an autobiography of Flannery for a long time. And so I met him when we were at the conference that was in Chicago about 10 years ago. And he was always really taken with the bits of the letters that talk about the article that was written on Freud and St. Thomas. And then he learned that I was a librarian. So he said, Heidi, I've never found the article that she's referencing. Can you try to find it? Because he really... What's that?
And you did?
I did, yes. So I researched that for a while, and I was able to find it, and I shared it with him. And I'm not sure how or if it ever made it into his autobiography at all, but for some reason he thought this was a really quintessential part of understanding at least some of the philosophical natures that Flannery was exploring at this time period, especially connecting St. Thomas and Freud. So I just wanted to share that little bit.
Write this up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know.
So the article is called
Well,
St.
probably
Thomas.
put it in the book because he put everything else he ever ran across into his manuscript at some point.
I know.
I mean, how many? Oh, I wrote another 100 pages about Betty Hester, you know, this summer. Oh, I wrote another 100 pages about Eric Langker. Oh my God. I mean, it was like, okay, it got to be what, like 3,500 pages or something? And then he tried to cut it down to
it's going to be what, 2 volumes?
And then he wanted it to be 2 volumes with hyperlinks so you could go read more about it. He put everything in, so he probably did. But so what? We're never going to see that book, I'm afraid. And, you know, you ought to at least put it in the chat so we can all write it down and steal it. The information. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So do you want me to, how do you want me to share that?
Oh, yeah.
Share with everybody.
I have the PDF of it, but I don't know if I don't think I can link it that way.
Okay.
But...
If you can send it to Jordan, he can send it out to all of us.
I can. Yeah.
It's his follow-up email.
Yep.
And then we'll all know.
All right, I will do that. It
Put
was in
my
the
email address in there.
It was
in the
what?
journal Cross Currents,
Currents.
number 4 in the fall of 1954. and it's just called St. Thomas and the Psychology of Freud by Albert Play. So anyway, I just thought that was really fun, and I was reminded that, oh yeah, these are the, because she mentions the letters quite a bit to Betty back and forth. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, right. She writes personal letters to people, and she's talking about scholarship she's been reading about St. Thomas and Freud, and she says she ain't no intellectual. What a study in contradictions. Yes.
Well, and Simone
That's
Weil
what we
too.
about-
That's a very interesting.
Which one?
Simone Weil too. The French, yeah.
Yeah.
She's very interesting.
She read all sorts of really challenging, difficult, complicated stuff, and did it very seriously, and thought about it, and wrote letters about it. And then she says, her one-liners about, I don't know nothing about nothing, and I can't do anything.
She was very much a scholar and then pretended she wasn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that there's a letter that sticks in my mind that she wrote to Billy Sessions, where he was doing a Freudian reading of I think Wise Blood, and she wrote back and said, "Recover your simplicity." So,
And
you're right about that, those two different opposing notions. I'm no intellectual, I don't know anything about anything. She didn't just discard Freud. She read Freud and understood and found him laughable, I think was her word, and Jung dangerous. So those two ideas, what do you do with that when she she acts like she doesn't understand, and then she simultaneously rejects it?
Right.
Sue, I published an article on this, but I found in the Wise Blood manuscripts, which would be around this time, she she actually in the early versions had a character named Chin, who was Hazel's friend and maybe roommate in some of the drafts, but he's a psychology student who's described, like, written to look just like Freud. I mean, he's like this very much Freud character, this whole Freud parody. So it's interesting. He gets excised from the novel, but yeah.
I remember reading a manuscript of Wise Blood in which she says that Enoch Emery and Hazel Motes are both like King Oedipus. And I thought, oh gosh, I need a break. Probably been reading too much Freud. Everything turns into a Freudian something if you spend too much time with it. Okay, and my last thought, if we're out of time, is that she said, you don't have to be good to be a good writer. This is the person who's been teaching us all about Catholicism through all these letters, and then she can say that.
And doesn't she get that from
Oh yeah, she gets it from the best sources.
she gets that from Aquinas, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure Aquinas says the same.
Right. But still.
Yeah.
Interesting thing to say. That being good has nothing to do with what we're up to here. That can be a little startling to some people who think, this is all about the most serious things in the world, and everything is on the line when you get serious about what's in fiction. And I want Flannery to be puzzling, and I think she is. She helps us with her letters. She helps us with her essays. And then she also gives us stuff to be puzzled by. And she gives us things to say, really? That's not how I read that story. What do I do when I disagree with the author? And, that's a good part of any literary education, is to find that you disagree with something that the author said about their own work, especially when you really like them. When you really like the literary work, what do you do then? You just go beat yourself up and change your position on everything. I don't know many people who do that. So, well, I thought I understood this story, but then I read Flannery O'Connor and I found out I was totally wrong about everything. And so I changed my mind. I don't hear that very often. I mean, like, never do I hear that somebody really changed their mind and decided that they had to make themselves agree with whatever Flannery told us in essays and letters about what's going on in this story. But still really interesting to wrestle with her. She seems so sure of herself sometimes, and then sometimes she casts down on herself and says terrible things about herself. And Betty Hester and Mary Lee too. We'll get to Mary Lee soon. Will make her say things that will make you wonder. That's a lot of the fun of the letters and the essays, is that they're not perfect, predictable clarifications of what you thought was there. The letters raise as many questions as they answer. Well, we'll do it again next month, folks.
Yeah,
November.
yeah. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll definitely send a follow-up. And if you're around on November 3rd for the Rome International
Go
Film
to
Festival,
Rome and do what you did in Milledgeville.
yeah. That's very appropriate. Otherwise, thanks so much, Hannah. I hope you this was helpful. And
We just
everybody.
probably messed with your mind totally tonight.
Thank you all so much for letting me jump in.
Oh no,
Anytime.
always welcome.
Okay.
Thanks.
See you next time, folks.
Bye.
Bye.